Hi. So I'm Emily Bradley. I am a product specialist on the email support team. Basically, that what that means is if you ever have any issues with your form, if there's any use cases you want to achieve, or you just need any help at all with the Form Assembly product, you can email me and I'm always there and happy and willing to help you out.
Thanks, Emily. Hey, everyone. I'm Justin Benton on the Form Assembly sales team. I've operated in a couple different roles, but they've all centralized around constantly working with prospective users and current Form Assembly users to tackle challenges, sometimes simple, sometimes complex, using our product and connecting that data to where it needs to be so it's impactful. We really appreciate everybody joining us today on the session, Workflow for Beginners. And it only feels appropriate that we would start that conversation off with, what is workflow? We recognize that a lot of Form Assembly users have not had any experience with workflow. This is entirely new territory for them. So the short answer for what is workflow is it's everything that happens before and after your form that makes that process impactful in the way it was supposed to be. Now, what that really means, and then the long answer, is that in these processes that you use forms, we understand that oftentimes it's not just the form. If it was as simple as the form being filled out and then everything was done, shut the lights down, life would be great. But usually there's other actions, steps, maybe even other forms or conditional things that need to occur based on the information initially collected. And workflow gives you a customizable builder to string all of those steps together so that way the forms are always doing what they were supposed to, driving the business critical impact.
Okay, so let's just have a quick moment to talk about what we're going to do today. So we're going to look at from forms to workflow. We're going to discuss the exclusive connectors that can only be used within workflow. And we're going to talk about new actions and features. And finally, we're going to have some live demos to give you a chance to actually see the workflow in action. Okay, so from form to workflow. So you can import steps. What does this mean? Well, it means that you don't have to rebuild or reconfigure key actions such as your connectors or your notifications. If you have already built that in the form builder, you can automatically use all that in the workflow if it has been set on the form level. Another hurdle that maybe you had looked into using workflows in the past, you weren't sure, you're now able to clone your workflows. So you can easily replicate and adjust existing workflows just like you would with a form. There's no hassle or delay, and you can launch your new process.
There's a few other aspects in how you would use a workflow similar to a form that might feel familiar. One of those is going to be collaboration. Similar to how you would collaborate with other Form Assembly users on an individual form, you can now collaborate with users across an entire workflow. That means you can edit steps in the workflow together or review responses that have been collected in the workflow together. Publishing is another method that's going to be a similar experience to what you're used to from a form, where workflows now have multiple options and so a variety of ways to deploy these embedded or just self-hosted forms and workflows across the web. There's also additional steps and actions that you can do in workflow that allows you to accomplish more than you could using an individual form. Some of those are going to include information that, or not information, but items that you'll be able to get more information on in future sessions. So definitely keep an eye out for those. And as a quick reminder, these sessions are all recorded for future playback if you miss any or find any that you wish you would have registered for beforehand. But some of those steps that you'll see in workflow are going to be things like approvals, which we'll look at a little more here in a second. But this is where you can bring in folks to weigh in on decisions that have to take place in those processes for, again, them to have that business critical impact. Other steps include advanced document generation so that you can have data collected, merged successfully, and with the theming and designing that you require into documents to display as needed, again, based on the information that you've collected. And you can also set up workflows to have conditional logic, because sometimes steps need to occur and sometimes they don't, and it might just depend on what's filled out in that first form or how any subsequent steps are. So again, is what's going to allow you to ensure that it's dynamically driving the impact that it's always supposed to have.
One of the features that I want to discuss is one of the new features is step replay and form reopen. This is really exciting. So step replay, you can fix and reprocess connector errors without having to start from scratch. You know, similar to when you're reprocessing a response within a form. For example, maybe you got a Salesforce connector error like 500 and you have to go re-authenticate your connector. Well, now within your workflow, you can replay and fix this issue and continue where the respondent has left off. This is saving hours of work, which is great. And the other one is form reopen. So you can quickly reopen edit forms to correct mistakes without breaking the workflow. So an example, just to give you an idea of why you might use this, a HR team is using workflows for onboarding. So say a new hire submits their tax form, but later on that they realize that they've entered a wrong email address or they've entered some sort of wrong data. Normally what would have to happen is they would have to contact the admin, restart the whole process again, or they would have to manually fix this record outside of form assembly. But with form reopen, the form can be reopened, corrected, and then resubmitted. And this just ensures that there's accuracy of the data without disrupting your workflow. And when you get an error, you will get two things. You'll get an error status, and you'll also get an error handling instructions. So later on, when I show you our demo, I will show you where that is. And it's good practice to leave good error handling instructions because it will ensure a smooth process when using this feature.
Another way that folks are seeing unique value out of workflow as opposed to individual forms is the variety of ways that you can now connect data beyond, again, that connector suite that you'll see on the individual form level. Workflow connectors are going to have some updated versions of connectors that you know and love and are familiar with, such as Salesforce or Google Sheets. There's going to be new ways to interact with those or new actions that you can just do with the connectors entirely that are only available in workflow. There's also going to be some brand new connectors that you otherwise wouldn't have access to outside of workflow. Those are going to include file storage options like Dropbox, Box, Microsoft OneDrive, and then we'll also have some upcoming connectors like HubSpot. And then we have our universal webhook connector, which allows you to send data to any endpoint across the web where your data needs to live.
Okay, thanks so much, Justin. So I'm just going to take a moment to talk about the Google Sheet connector. So using Google Sheets connector with Form Assembly allows you to automatically send your form submissions to your Google Sheets in real time. It's actually fantastic, but there's many reasons why you might want to use it. So you can push the responses directly to Google as soon as they are submitted. It eliminates the need to manually enter data or export CSVSs. And Google Sheets makes it really easy to not just collect the data, but also share with team members without having to give them access to Form Assembly. So what I'm going to do now is show you a little live demo because some of you might be using the Google Sheets within the form, but it does look a little bit different on the workflow. So when you're starting your workflow, if you're brand new to this and you're used to the form builder, you can build a very simple form within the form builder. Then what we do is we go into the workflow builder. And all you've seen here is I've taken that form from the form builder and I've added it into my workflow. I've added a simple redirect step and a notification email. Very simple. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add the Google Sheets connector. So we simply add step. We're going to search for the connectors. And here I'm going to select the Google Sheets. So what we have to first do is the authorization. So who you are going to connect to. I'm going to connect it to my Google Sheets. And it's that
Oh, I
simple.
apologize to cut you off. The screen's not coming through, but
Oh,
I want to
thank you
double check, make sure
so
it's not.
much. Thank you so much. Here we go. All right. Quick live demo. Is it now working?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, so we have our form builder we all know and love. We have our workflow here. So here it is. I'll go over this once more time just to give you a visual. So here we have it. We have our form, we have our redirect step, and our notification email. We're going to click on the add a step. We're going to click for the connectors. Here you'll have all your available connectors to use. I am going to pick Google Sheets. As I already mentioned, we're going to authorize. I'm going to select my, and then we're going to go to configuration. And here we are going to pick the Google Sheet or the spreadsheet that we want to use. Now, when using the Google Sheet connector, it's actually really important that you build the sheet within Google first. So I have done this before. It's the simple sheet there, and I'm going to do a destination tab. So what this means is it's going to send all the responses of this form to this specific tab. A very interesting or cool thing about the action cards is that they're color coded. This is a really great way of knowing when you have completed something or not completed it. So as you can see here, this bar here is orange. There's a little warning sign and it's saying, you know, you haven't completed something. So how to fix this or remedy this, I'm going to finish my mappings. As you can see, there is unfinished mappings. Now, I'm going to map the questions on my first form into the columns in my Google Sheets. And I'm just going to go first name. And as you can see there, it's gone from green to orange, back to green. So it's saying everything's mapped, which is lovely. We love to see green. And we're going to map this all the way down. And that is it. It is that simple. I've mapped all the fields that I want to send over in my form. I'm going to click Save. And just to show you how quick this is in real time, I'm actually going to show you how quick it is by quickly submitting my form. And submit. Brilliant. And so now I'm going to go over to the sheet, and straight away, before I even clicked on the tab, it's already in the Google Sheet. That is how quick and convenient it is. Okay. And Justin, I think you're going to have a demo now.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. That was great. I'll go ahead and run us through how somebody would utilize the approvals functionality inside a form assembly workflow. And before I share my screen, as a quick understanding of who are the types of folks that are going to even interact with this, there's 2 points of view to consider. And one is going to be who's setting up the actual workflow step for the approval. And this is where you can take those complex processes and simplify those decisions into an automated step that, again, notifies who needs to be involved so that they can weigh in. And that second point of view is going to be the actual approver. This is where somebody that has the permissions enabled for their approval user as a form assembly user can go in and via a dashboard approve or deny any actions that have been assigned to them. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we will take a look at the entire process together. And when I say the entire process, I mean we're going to start with our form and bring this into a workflow and set up that approval step together. What you're looking at now is going to be the form builder screen. This should be familiar territory for everyone. And so the first thing I want to do is take this form and set it up inside of a workflow. If I navigate back to my form assembly home screen, anybody that has a team or higher plan level for form assembly will have access to the workflow builder, and I can either click into my existing list or a brand new workflow here. Like we mentioned earlier in the call, you can clone out those workflows so that way you don't have to build from scratch. But in this case, I do want to start with the blank workflow. As always, the first thing I'll do is name my workflow and then set up that first form. When I select my form, I'll navigate to the Configure tab, find my form, which I can start searching through. And again, we mentioned earlier that there's going to be a way to import anything that's already applied to that form. So this is where I can select all of the steps, or in some cases, maybe I don't want to have save and resume here, but I do want to utilize the existing thank you message or redirect URL and notification email. With one click, those are applied into the workflow, and I can save, launching everything ready for use. Now, the one additional step that I'll need is an approval. Looking at my workflow, I'll be able to hover down this line and see anywhere that I get that blue icon is where I can click and add a step. I want to add my approval at the end, but ideally it can go anywhere after that redirect. I'll go ahead and select that approval step. And as soon as I make that selection, we'll see that two pathways start branching off, because this is where I'll be able to configure the approval. But more importantly, I get to configure what happens after something is approved or denied. Because historically, this means that a form assembly user would say, I send the data off to another application or another endpoint, or I reach out to somebody via email, and then I have a complex system of redirects or ways to reintroduce another workflow or form once we have this information. This allows you to keep the momentum going without ever having to leave form assembly, reducing any friction and reducing any troubleshooting overhead. Let's go ahead and configure this step now. And I'll just jump into that second tab here of configure. And because your workflows can contain more than one form, and oftentimes might need to, you can assign the specific form that somebody needs to interact with here. This is a good time to call out that data can also flow between forms inside of a workflow. So any data collected in one form can always populate into another, ensuring that your approvers always see any and everything inside of a workflow that they should. I can also require comments, or enable and then require comments if necessary. But what I really want to take a look at is how we assign approvers. Because again, anybody with the approver's permissions in their user setup in form assembly can weigh in as an approver. And sometimes it's as simple as a single approver that needs to say thumbs up or thumbs down. However, sometimes you might have more than one approver involved. And in the event of having more than one approver, you now have options to say, I want the first to respond to be the who resolves this. So that way you can expedite processes, never having to wait on any bottlenecks that are undue or unnecessary. But I can also set approval thresholds. So if I were to have 2 approvers or 20, I can set any number in between that to, again, make sure that regardless of how complex this approval needs to be, it's a simplified process mapped out inside of form assembly. I'm going to go ahead and stick to 1 approver for this use case. And below is where I would fill out the notifications for that approver. I can obviously modify just statically things like the requester name or the reply to, or even the body that explains the reason for the request. But I also like to call out, anytime we see this blue F, that's going to open our formula editor, allowing us to interact with variables and dynamic data based on what the form has provided. So I can drop in something like a requested by field collected in my form. So that way somebody would be alerted by whoever it was that filled out that form. Obviously, if we had filled this out and set it up, then we would have that full end-to-end process. But what I'll do now is shift over to an existing approval submission. So once something is submitted, an approver is going to see a message like this, where they can obviously, again, have that customized body here, customized text at the top of who's requesting, but they can click straight into the email and either logging in if they're not logged in already or using an active session like I am right now, go directly to that approval without taking any unnecessary steps, review the information provided, and again, weigh in however appropriate. Those approvals are all going to be cataloged in a dashboard as well. So that way they can, inside the Form Assembly platform, easily navigate to any outstanding requests as well as completed requests that have happened in the past. And that's Form Assembly approvals. I'll go ahead and bring us back to our presentation screen. And this is where we'd like to kick off a Q&A session. There's definitely some questions that have popped in. I'm not sure if, Emily, if there's any that you've captured already you'd like to speak to.
Yeah, I just saw a few questions here, but obviously feel free to write in. So one question we have was, their organization doesn't allow for personal data in Google Sheets. And they were wondering, can you limit which results go into Google Sheets? So yes, you only need, that color coding only happens if you either don't have a finished mapping, or all you literally have to have is at least one mapping, and it will go back to the beautiful green. So yes, you can have only the fields that you want to send over to your Google Sheets will be sent over. And I saw...
That's also another scenario where we would see a lot of folks really leverage the conditional logic that can be applied to your workflows, where based on any action that occurs inside the workflow, you can dictate what needs to happen next. And in some cases, that might be two separate Google Sheets connectors that fire off differently, depending on what was entered in that form. But a ton of ways that you could chop that up.
Mm-hmm. Another question is, for when you reopen a workflow and resubmit it after fixing an error, will the respondent receive a second confirmation email? So we actually have a brand new document, Google Doc, that was released in the last few days, which will go over this in a lot more detail and has screenshots. But what happens is it triggers an email response. So you can email the respondent to reopen it. So yes, they will be notified. Do you have anything to add to that, Justin?
No, nailed it. You nailed it.
Yeah. Let me see. Let's see if we have any newer ones.
It looks like there's a great question about the difference between setting up connectors in workflow versus using the connector tab.
Yeah.
And just to make, I want to make sure that I'm not, assuming incorrectly. It sounds like you're asking about the connectors tab on the form page. And that is a great question. And honestly, a great way to think about Form Assembly workflow. Because when you navigate to that connector page on a form, what you're looking at is a workflow. That is a workflow or a timeline that says, here are a few specific spots on the timeline where you can apply a connector. And what workflow does is, instead of having those actions be specific to that form, it says, let's talk about the entire process. Bring in that form or additional forms, any forms that you need. And now let's set up connectors, not specific to just that form, but specific to this process, and let you configure that, not just on those 3 or 4 different timeline spots that are provided in the connectors tab, but anywhere along the entire process or conditionally as you see fit.
I just saw someone say that your mapping brought the field names above each entry. That wouldn't happen every time I deleted the step for the demonstration purposes. So your field names would be on the top, and then you would have your nice rows of your data below. Oh, yes. So here's a question for you, Justin, which is good. Can you push approvals and denials to Salesforce?
Yeah, so that's something that is definitely possible, but something that I'd always recommend working backwards from, because again, the goal of having the approve and deny is there's things that need to happen after that decision is made. It's not as simple as they approved it, they denied it, turn the lights out, we can all go home. There's something else happening. And so those pathways that you have after the approve or deny is exactly where you'd be able to equip the Salesforce connectors, email notifications, or other connectors or key steps that need to occur based on the decision. Now, how you map it is going to be more dependent on your Salesforce data model and what you need to achieve inside Salesforce. But absolutely, that conditional step that occurs only when approving or only after a denial is the goal.
We have, I've seen this question asked a few times. So, do all approvers have to have form assembly licenses?
Yes. So anyone that is approving inside of Form Assembly does need a license and the ability to log into Form Assembly. However, the way to think about approvals is that it is a permission that can be applied to somebody that has an existing license or it can be given to somebody that doesn't have a license. Because sometimes an approver might be somebody who otherwise never logs into Form Assembly. The only time they would log in is to approve. And we can set them up with a license specific for that. But you can also give approval permissions to anybody that's logging in otherwise. So you may have your super admin of Form Assembly who's building all the forms, designing all the themes, and just so happens to be the person approving everything. They would just have all the permissions applied necessary to complete those tasks.
And someone is asking, but you can use the connectors which are already built within the forms. So yes, if you have already built your form and you have your connectors and you have your notifications, everything that is on that form level, if you bring that form into the workflow, you can still, use them as well. I think that's a similar question.
I see a great question I want to highlight really quickly. Somebody asked if there's a section where we can map data from one form to another form in a workflow, and absolutely. So your workflow can contain any number of forms that's necessary for the process. And anytime you have more than one form in a workflow, you'll have an additional tab pop up that allows you to pre-fill values between those forms. Not only can you do that, I would recommend that as the most secure way to push data between any two forms, because it's never leaving Form Assembly. You're keeping that data inside the Form Assembly application at all times, so that this is the best way to keep that data moving along, and then only send it to Salesforce or a Microsoft Suite application when appropriate down the line, cutting back on any calls going outside. But then there's also ways that you can set up variables to make the data that's pre-filling between points in the workflow a little more dynamic. So simply and complexly, absolutely, you can pre-fill between forms. I see that somebody asked about workflow accessibility as well. As a quick reminder, workflow is going to be available to all Form Assembly customers that are on a team plan or higher. So if you're on the Form Assembly Essentials plan, or like the basic or other self-service plans, unfortunately, you don't have access to workflow. But let us know if you have any questions or would like to inquire about seeing if it's beneficial for you and your team. And I know we have a few more questions rolling in with a little more time, so we'll see if we can get to a few more. Somebody asked if we connect a form, let me see, to an already built form that contains connectors and make edit. So this is a great moment to identify that any form exists as the form, but that form is being used by the workflow. And what I mean by that is if I were to create a form and then put it in a workflow, any changes I make to that form in the form builder are going to be reflected in the workflow, because the workflow is forever and always calling that form into use. However, any connectors at the form level will never be engaged or run when a form that's used in a workflow runs. Only the workflow level connectors will. So that way, if you make a change to, say, a connector at the form level, it will impact the workflow none. But if you make a change to that form or the theme of the form, then obviously it will change.
Also, very quickly, last moment, someone was asking if there's anything on webhooks. Tomorrow, there is going to be a webinar on webhooks. So if you want to check out all the brilliant showcasings that's happening tomorrow as well. Oh, I rushed it. I thought I had 1 minute left, but I had plenty of time. But yeah, if you want to check out all of them, there's going to be some really brilliant discussions had over tomorrow as well.
Can't recommend the sessions enough. And as another reminder, any session you've registered to, we'll have that playback for you. Thank you so much for everyone that joined today. We really appreciate your time, and it was a pleasure.